While my mother-in-law was happily shopping with my husband's mistress, I was canceling all her cards. My mother-in-law still knows nothing. She doesn't know that this palace she lives in belongs entirely to me. My revenge has only just begun. All right, mark your attendance first with a subscription, a like, and a comment. If you have already done that, let's get into the beginning of the story. The clinking of a silver spoon against a porcelain plate was the only music filling the grandiose dining room. A massive crystal chandelier above the table reflected its golden light onto the cold, gleaming surface of the Italian marble. This was the stage where the drama of this family played out every night. Kenyatta Dubois, the unacknowledged director and lead actress, listlessly stirred her cream of vegetable soup. That night, she had prepared her husband's favorite dish, smothered oxtails with gravy. It was a process that took over 5 hours, but Kenyatta had done it gladly, hoping to see a smile of satisfaction on his face. However, D'Angelo Vance ate in silence. His eyes landed more often on his smartphone screen than on his wife sitting across from him. "This stew is actually decent, Kenyatta." The voice of Mrs. Eudora broke the silence. Her tone was dry, but full of invisible thorns. Silence. Her tone was dry, but full of invisible thorns. "It reminds me of the taste of a lentil stew from some rundown shack near our old neighborhood. For something made by someone like you, it tastes quite authentic." A compliment wrapped in an insult. Kenyatta was used to it. She simply sketched a slight curve with her lips, a pale smile she had practiced for years. Sketched a slight curve with her lips, a pale smile she had practiced for years. "I am glad it is to your liking, Mama." "Of course Mama likes it. Mama appreciates anything her daughter-in-law does," said D'Angelo, finally lifting his eyes from his phone. He winked at Kenyatta as if they were a complicit team, but Kenyatta knew that defense was hollow. It was simply D'Angelo's way of ending potentially awkward conversations, not to protect her pride. "But next time, try a recipe from that French culinary arts book I bought you. Our family needs to get used to high-class dishes, not this country-style market food," continued Mrs. Eudora, deliberately setting down her spoon with an elegant gesture. Kenyatta did not respond. She merely looked at her husband, seeking a minimum of support in his eyes, but all she found was his elusive gaze as he busily poured water into his goblet. At that very moment, Kenyatta felt like the loneliest person in the palace she herself had built. This house, filled with high columns and imported furniture, felt colder and emptier than the modest rental room she had grown up in. After dinner, as always, it was Kenyatta's task to clean everything up. The housekeepers could only work until the afternoon, a rule of Mrs. Eudora's to supposedly protect the family's privacy during the evening. In reality, it was another way to underscore Kenyatta's position as the personal servant of the house. While she scrubbed the expensive plates she would never have dared to use early in her marriage, Kenyatta looked at herself in the reflection of the dark kitchen window. It was the tired face of a woman who had everything but possessed nothing. In the outside world, unknown to her husband and mother-in-law, she was a queen. Kenyatta was the founder and CEO of Apex Innovations, a tech startup currently valued in the billions of dollars. She had built the company from scratch with her own sweat and tears, but in this house, she deliberately hid her shine. She let D'Angelo appear as the successful head of the household, who lived off investments from his father's inheritance, a lie they had created together, so as not to bruise D'Angelo's ego. All this opulence, the mansion, the cars, the vacations, even Mrs. Eudora's unlimited credit card, came out of Kenyatta's account. They lived comfortably at the expense of her hard work while constantly trampling on her pride. That night, as she rinsed the suds from her hands, Kenyatta asked herself for the first time, "How long must I continue with this charade?" Kenyatta's doubt did not arrive like a storm. It was like a slow drizzle soaking her clothes and chilling her bones. It all started with a routine check in her home office, a minimalist space equipped with state-of-the-art technology that contrasted with the rest of the house, considered by D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora as Kenyatta's strange hobby corner. There, behind the thick, solid wood door, Kenyatta shed her role as the submissive wife. She was KD, a respected initial in the business world. In front of monitors displaying complex data and charts, she simultaneously monitored the pulse of her company and her personal finances. It was then that she noticed an anomaly. The credit card she had given to Mrs. Eudora, normally used only for monthly shopping at high-end supermarkets like Whole Foods or occasional meetings at a hotel cafe, showed a strange spending pattern. There was a bill from the luxury boutique Maison Élysée for a sum equivalent to the price of a car. There were also multiple transactions at the Pearl Aesthetic Institute, an elite beauty salon where a treatment cost a manager's salary. And what appeared most frequently were dinner bills at the Skyline View, a fine dining restaurant atop a skyscraper that not even Kenyatta herself had visited. At first, Kenyatta ignored it. She thought perhaps Mrs. Eudora wanted to treat herself, but the transactions repeated almost weekly and always on the same days that D'Angelo claimed to have to work late on a new project or meet with an important client from out of town. The suspicion grew denser. D'Angelo became more distant. His phone was always on silent and never left his side. He often walked away to take calls in a hushed voice. Sometimes, when he returned home late at night, Kenyatta perceived the smell of an unknown woman's perfume on his shirt. It wasn't the strong, classic fragrance of her mother-in-law, but a sweet, modern scent. When Kenyatta tried to ask, D'Angelo always had a slick answer. That must be a client's perfume, baby. The conference room was very small. Oh, you know I don't like talking about work at home. It gives me a headache. The breaking point came with a call from Nia, her best friend from their HBCU days. Nia's voice sounded hesitant on the other end of the line. Kenyatta, are you okay? Of course, Nia. Why do you ask? Kenyatta replied, forcing herself to sound cheerful. There was a pause. Kenyatta could hear Nia take a deep breath. I don't want to meddle, but I saw D'Angelo by chance at Phipps Plaza a few days ago. He wasn't alone. Kenyatta's heart beat a little faster. He was surely with a client, she said, more to convince herself. He didn't look like a client, Kenyatta. And I think I also saw Mrs. Eudora at the same restaurant, at the same table, laughing with them. But I was far away. I'm not sure. The call ended in an awkward atmosphere. Kenyatta said, "Thank you," but her mind was a whirlwind. Mrs. Eudora, laughing with D'Angelo and an unknown woman? The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, forming a terrible image she didn't even dare to imagine. The drizzle of doubt now felt like a heavy thundercloud over her head, ready to unleash a storm at any moment. 2 days later, the storm arrived via a brief message on her phone. That afternoon, Kenyatta was on a video conference with her team in Singapore. She was discussing the expansion strategy in the Southeast Asian market with eloquence and confidence. On the screen, she was a brilliant CEO. But when the call ended and silence flooded her office again, she returned to being the restless Kenyatta. Her phone vibrated on the desk, showing a notification of a message from Nia. Her heart skipped a beat. With slightly trembling hands, she opened the message. It was a short sentence. "I'm sorry, Kenyatta. I think you need to see this." Below the sentence was a photo. Kenyatta's world seemed to stop. Her breath caught in her throat. The photo, apparently taken secretly from a table opposite, showed a scene in a cafe at a luxury boutique. There, sitting very intimately, were 3 people she knew. Her husband, D'Angelo, was looking adoringly at a young woman beside him. It was, without a doubt, the mistress. She was leaning flirtatiously on D'Angelo's shoulder, showing him a new shopping bag from a famous brand. But it wasn't that which destroyed Kenyatta. What shattered her heart was the third person in the photo. Mrs. Eudora, her mother-in-law, was sitting across from them with a smile so radiant and sincere that she had never directed it at Kenyatta. And her hand, Mrs. Eudora's hand, was reaching out tenderly to brush a strand of hair from the mistress's cheek. A maternal gesture. A sign of acceptance. A seal of blessing. Kenyatta felt a coldness, soak her to the bone, colder than the marble floor of her house. D'Angelo's betrayal was painful enough, but seeing her mother-in-law, whom she had served despite always being ignored, conspiring with her husband's mistress, and even coddling her in that way, was like being stabbed in the front and back at the same time. She zoomed in on the photo with numb eyes, examining every detail. The shopping bag the mistress held was from the Maison Élysée boutique. Their table was full of pretty desserts from the imperial patisserie. Every strange charge on the credit card now had a face, the satisfied face of the mistress and the happy face of Mrs. Eudora. They were feasting on her money, celebrating their betrayal behind her back.
Crash.
The glass of water next to her laptop fell to the floor, shattering just like her heart. But Kenyatta didn't cry. The tears seemed to have frozen in her eyelids. There was only a hollow emptiness, and that emptiness began to slowly fill with a cold, burning anger. She looked at her pale face reflected in the dark screen of her phone. The woman in the reflection looked fragile and defeated, but in her eyes, something had just been born, something hard, sharp, and relentless. This charade had reached its final act. Kenyatta remained motionless in her chair for nearly an hour. She sat in silence amidst the shards of broken glass, letting the stillness of the office absorb all the emotions boiling inside her. The pain, the shock, and the disappointment settled slowly, replaced by a terrifying calm. It was the calm before the tsunami. She stood up and stepped over the broken glass without flinching. Her steps took her toward the large window overlooking the perfectly manicured backyard, a garden she had designed and paid to maintain but had never been able to enjoy in peace. Until now, she had thought her patience was a virtue. She thought if she submitted and dedicated herself, she would one day be accepted. She thought if she hid her power, she could maintain peace in the home and her husband's ego. How naive she had been. Her patience was taken for weakness. Her dedication was considered a duty. Her sacrifice was taken for granted. They, D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora, had taken everything from her. Her time, her energy, her money, and now her dignity. They let her build this palace only to turn her into a servant within it. Meanwhile, they brought in a stranger and sat her on the throne. "It's over," she whispered to her reflection her voice was hoarse but firm. She returned to her desk. With a decisive movement, she turned the monitors back on. The stock charts, the financial reports, the urgent emails from directors. Everything looked different. Now, this was no longer just a job. It was her kingdom. It was her source of power, what she had built with blood and sweat, something she would not allow the parasites in her life to trample on. The patient woman who cooked oxtails for 5 hours had died that afternoon. What remained was Kenyatta Dubois, the CEO of Apex Innovations, a strategist known for being cold and calculating. The long slumber as a submissive wife was over. The queen had awakened. She picked up the phone and dialed her personal assistant's number. "Miss Price, good afternoon." "Yes, Mrs. Dubois, how can I help you?" The professional voice of Miss Price rang through the receiver. "I need several things. First, prepare a full report of all my personal assets, including real estate, vehicles, and bank accounts. Report of all my personal assets, including real estate, vehicles, and bank accounts. Separate what are community assets and what are purely assets in my name acquired before the marriage. Understood?" "Understood, Mrs. Dubois." "Second, contact our legal team. Tell them to prepare a draft for divorce and division of assets. Attach all the assets I requested in the first point as initial data." There was a brief pause. Miss Price was clearly surprised. "Yes, Mrs. Dubois, I will process it immediately." "And Price," Kenyatta added, her voice cold as ice, "from now on inform me in real time of all expenses generated on the additional credit cards in the names of D'Angelo Vance and Eudora Vance." "Understood, Mrs. Dubois." After hanging up, Kenyatta opened a drawer in her desk. She took out a small notebook with a leather cover. On the first page, she wrote with neat, decisive handwriting, "Operation Take It All Back." A plan began to form in her mind, not an emotional revenge plan, but a calculated business strategy. The goal was to strip them of all the power and luxury that had made them so arrogant and force them to face reality. She would make them feel what it was like to have nothing. The first execution of her plan began the next morning. Kenyatta deliberately got up earlier, put on her best power suit, and left the house. Before D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora woke up, she had breakfast in her CEO office on the 50th floor, overlooking the entire city of Atlanta. The landscape reminded her how vast her world was and how small her domestic problems were from that height. Exactly at 9 a.m., she called her private banker. "Mr. Robinson, good morning. This is Kenyatta Dubois." "Ah, Mrs. Dubois, it is an honor to receive your call. How can I help you?" "I need you to freeze all additional credit and debit cards linked to my accounts with immediate effect. All cards. Also the ones in the name of Mr. D'Angelo Vance and Mrs. Eudora Vance?" Mr. Robinson asked to confirm. "Yes, all of them. As a reason, simply note security reasons. Say we have detected suspicious activity," Kenyatta said in a business tone that admitted no reply. "Understood, Mrs. Dubois. Request received. I will process it immediately. In 5 minutes, all cards will be inoperative." Kenyatta hung up feeling a cold satisfaction. The first blow had been struck. On the other side of the city, Mrs. Eudora and her son's mistress, Callis, were enjoying the height of their arrogance. After a treatment at a beauty salon, they decided to have lunch at a 5-star hotel restaurant. Callis flirtatiously pointed out the lobster thermidor and the most expensive champagne. Mrs. Eudora, feeling very generous and powerful with a wallet that wasn't hers, simply smiled and nodded. "You deserve the best, dear. Our future daughter-in-law has to look perfect," said Mrs. Eudora with a wink. When they finished dessert and the bill arrived, Mrs. Eudora smugly handed her black card to the waiter. A few minutes later, the waiter returned with a flustered look. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The card has been declined." Mrs. Eudora's face turned red. "What do you mean declined? Try again." Surely the signal was bad. She snapped at the waiter. He tried again. The result was the same. "It still isn't working, ma'am." Callis was starting to get impatient. Mrs. Eudora clicked her tongue and took another card from her purse, the platinum one, declined as well. Panic began to take hold of her. She tried the debit card. The same. Murmurs from nearby tables began to be heard. Mrs. Eudora's face burned. Shame, anger, and confusion mixed into one. Immediately, she took out her phone and dialed Kenyatta's number. In her office, Kenyatta saw her mother-in-law's name flashing on her phone screen. She let it ring a couple of times before answering with a slightly sleepy voice. "Tell me, Mama." "Kenyatta, what have you done to my cards? Why are they all being declined?" Mrs. Eudora's shrill voice was heard, so loud she didn't need to put it on speaker. Kenyatta pulled the phone away from her ear for a moment. Yes, they were declined, Mama," she asked, feigning surprise. "Maybe it's a bank network failure, or maybe you entered the PIN wrong. Try again later. Don't lie to me. This is your doing, surely. Reactivate them right now. Later. Don't lie to me. This is your doing, surely. Reactivate them right now." "I'm sorry. I'm in the middle of a meeting. I cannot be interrupted," Kenyatta replied calmly. And without waiting for an answer, she hung up, looked at her phone screen, and then turned it off. On the other end, she could imagine the panic and fury of her mother-in-law. She could imagine the sullen face of Callis, whose plans to live a life of luxury that day in law. She could imagine the sullen face of Calais, whose plans to live a life of luxury that day had been ruined. A small, cold smile, the first genuine smile, appeared on Kenyatta's lips. The game had just begun, and this time she held all the cards. The front door of the imposing house burst open, breaking the silence of the night. Mrs. Eudora entered like a whirlwind, her face congested with anger and humiliation. Behind her followed Callis with a sour face. The humiliation at the restaurant had been unforgettable. After all the cards were declined, Callis had to pay with her own debit card, an unexpected expense that had her complaining throughout the taxi ride. Kenyatta was waiting for them in the living room. She was sitting quietly on a single armchair with a cup of hot jasmine tea in her hand, as if waiting for guests of honor. The image enraged Mrs. Eudora even more. "Kenyatta Dubois," she shouted. Her voice echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "How dare you humiliate me in public? Who do you think you are, huh?" Kenyatta took a slow sip of her tea before setting it on the table. She looked at her mother-in-law with cold, unfamiliar eyes that Mrs. Eudora had never seen before. "I am just sitting in my house. Mama, Are you the one who came in shouting at this time of night? Who is the rude one here? Mrs. Eudora gasped. The calm, sharp retort left her speechless for a moment. Until now, Kenyatta would have been the daughter-in-law who bowed her head and asked for forgiveness for any fault. But the woman in front of her was different. Callous, sensing the unfavorable atmosphere, decided to intervene with an ingratiating tone. Ma'am, calm down. Surely Kenyatta didn't do it on purpose, right, Kenyatta? Next time, don't forget to pay the credit card bills, okay? The lady gets embarrassed. It was a fatal mistake. Kenyatta's eyes locked onto Callie's. Her gaze was as sharp as a scalpel. First, I have never forgotten to pay a single bill. Second, I don't recall inviting you to my house. And third, Kenyatta paused, letting every word sink in. This is a matter between my mother-in-law and me. A stranger has no business interfering. Callis's face paled instantly. The status of future daughter-in-law that Mrs. Eudora took such pride in seemed to vanish without a trace under Kenyatta's gaze. She looked for D'Angelo, who had just come down the stairs upon hearing the commotion. Seeking defense, Mrs. Eudora finally recovered her voice. A stranger? She is D'Angelo's future wife and my future daughter-in-law. The one who will soon be a stranger here is you. You are nothing but a useless daughter-in-law who can't even manage the household finances. Kenyatta sketched a slight smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The household finances. Mama, do you really want to talk about that? From what I know, the people who have never contributed a dime to the finances of this house are the ones demanding and shouting the loudest. The barb was aimed precisely at Mrs. Eudora and D'Angelo simultaneously. D'Angelo, who had remained silent until now, finally felt he had to come to the defense of his mother and his mistress. But before he could open his mouth, Kenyatta had already stood up. I'm tired. I'm going to rest, she said with a final tone. She walked past the three people, still paralyzed by shock, and went up the stairs toward her room. She didn't look back once. That night, for the first time, Mrs. Eudora felt that something was wrong, very wrong. She was used to living like a queen in this house where her every word was a command, but tonight she felt stripped of her power by the daughter-in-law she had always considered a doormat. The storm she had unleashed was nothing but a breeze compared to the cold calm of the awakened Kenyatta. After Kenyatta disappeared into her room, Mrs. Eudora unleashed her remaining anger on D'Angelo. Did you see the wife you chose? She dares to answer me back. As her husband, you should educate her. Go talk to her right now, and tell her to reactivate all my cards. She yanked her son's arm, complaining. D'Angelo, with his ego wounded by Kenyatta's icy attitude, felt challenged. He was the man of the house, or at least he had always believed so. With an arrogant stride, he followed Kenyatta to her bedroom. He found her standing in front of the closet, choosing silk pajamas as if nothing had happened. The sight provoked him. Kenyatta, what is with this attitude? He asked loudly. Why are you disrespecting my mother? And why are you blocking the cards? Kenyatta turned and looked at her husband with an impassive expression. I'm simply tired of being insulted in my own home, D'Angelo, and the cards were just a routine security measure. Security? What nonsense! You humiliated my mother on purpose in front of Callis. You're jealous, aren't you? Accused D'Angelo, trying to find a reason his shallow understanding could accept. Kenyatta let out a small laugh, a dry, humorless sound that made D'Angelo uncomfortable. Jealous, D'Angelo? I assure you my current emotions go far beyond something so simple. I don't want to know, snapped D'Angelo, returning to his arrogant mode. Go down right now, apologize to my mother, and reactivate all the cards tomorrow morning. I am your husband, and this is an order. It was this exact moment that Kenyatta had been waiting for. She put down the pajamas and walked over to D'Angelo, looking him straight in the eyes. There was no longer sweetness or pleading, only the gaze of a CEO evaluating an incompetent subordinate. D'Angelo Vance, she called him with a low, dangerous voice. Do you really want to talk to me about financial matters? Do you really want to argue about orders and authority in this house? D'Angelo fell silent. There was a clear tone of threat in that question, a level of power he had never heard in Kenyatta before. Until now, he had no idea where her money came from. He only knew it was always there, flowing into his account every month. Money enough for a lavish lifestyle and to support a mistress. He had always assumed it came from investments Kenyatta managed. "Of course I do," he replied, trying to cling to the shreds of his pride, though his voice trembled slightly. Kenyatta smiled sideways. "Fine. Then explain to me what your source of income has been this month. How much have you contributed to paying the mortgage, the electricity bills, the staff salaries, or even the food you just ate for dinner? Before giving an order to anyone, make sure you have the right to do so." D'Angelo's tongue froze. He couldn't answer. He had never truly worked a day in his life. Everything he had was given to him, and in that moment, under his wife's piercing gaze, he felt like a foolish prince who had just been stripped of his crown. "It's late. I need to sleep," said Kenyatta, turning around and ending the conversation. D'Angelo could only stand there stunned, his anger mixed with confusion and a sense of humiliation. He had come to teach his wife a lesson, but instead felt he had just received one himself. He still didn't fully understand what was happening, but one thing was certain. The Kenyatta he knew had disappeared, and he didn't like her replacement at all. If the credit card incident was the main tremor, the following days were a series of aftershocks that slowly brought down the building of his comfort. Kenyatta no longer needed to say anything. She just acted in silence. The next morning, Mrs. Eudora, impeccably dressed, was preparing to go to her social gathering with her sorority sisters. She waited impatiently in the driveway. Her personal driver, Mr. Henderson, did not arrive. After several unanswered calls, she finally called the limousine service company. The answer was brief and professional. "We're sorry, ma'am. The service contract for your address is being reviewed at the request of our main client. Service is suspended until further notice." Main client? Mrs. Eudora frowned, not understanding. Grudgingly and grumbling, she called a rideshare. A supremely humiliating experience for her. Meanwhile, D'Angelo was trying to transfer money to Calais, who wouldn't stop complaining and demanding compensation for the restaurant incident. The notification on his phone screen left him frozen. Insufficient funds. He checked his account. Kenyatta's monthly transfer, which normally should have arrived by the 1st, was nowhere to be found. His account was practically empty. Panic seized him. He called Kenyatta, but the call went straight to voicemail. The chaos in the house intensified. The head housekeeper approached Mrs. Eudora with a worried face. "Ma'am, our wages have not been deposited yet. Normally they would be here by now, and the pantry inventory is almost exhausted. The online grocery delivery service has also been suspended for non-payment." Mrs. Eudora, who had never worried about such trivial details, could only snap. "Well, use the cash in the house." "There is no cash left, ma'am," replied the employee. Mrs. Eudora was speechless. The house, always cool, now felt stifling. The premium cable TV with hundreds of channels suddenly stopped working. The Wi-Fi speed, once ultra-fast, was now as slow as a dial-up connection from the past. The comforts they had taken for granted as a right were being cut off one by one without warning. Kenyatta was like a ghost in her own home. She left for work before dawn and returned late at night when everyone was asleep. She deliberately avoided home. She left for work before dawn and returned late at night when everyone was asleep. She deliberately avoided confrontation. She let them stew in their own panic, feeling how the money faucet, which had always flowed in torrents, now dripped until dry. Their luxury was nothing more than an illusion that could be turned off as easily as flipping a switch. And now that switch was in her hand. In her rented luxury apartment, Calais was starting to get restless. Her handsome, rich prince, D'Angelo, now visited her more often with a frown than with shopping bags. The promises of dinners at the newest restaurants, a trip to Bali, a limited edition watch, everything had evaporated. "Baby, what's wrong with you lately?" Calais asked, massaging his temples. They had just eaten dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but takeout D'Angelo had bought on the way. "There are some problems at home." "What kind of problems?" "Nothing major, just Kenyatta is acting a little weird," said D'Angelo, trying to avoid the subject. How weird. Weird enough that my monthly allowance hasn't arrived yet, snapped D'Angelo. His tone was starting to sharpen. And where is your car? Why are you taking Ubers everywhere lately? What will my friends think if I tell them I'm dating a man without a car? D'Angelo sighed deeply. The car is in the shop and there's been a problem with the cards. That's why I haven't been able to make the transfer. Just have a little patience. Patience. I've had enough patience, D'Angelo. I rejected plenty of other rich men for you. You promised you'd marry me and give me a better life than that bland wife of yours. And now what is this? Yesterday, I even had to pay the restaurant bill. Callous exploded. Her sweet facade vanished. Her relationship built on the foundations of luxury and lies began to show its first cracks. Callous wasn't with D'Angelo for love, but for the lifestyle he could offer. When that lifestyle was threatened, her loyalty also wavered. Listen, this is temporary. Soon everything will go back to normal. Callous pushed him away. I don't want promises. I want proof. Next week is my birthday. Buy me that Birkin bag we saw. If you buy it for me, I'll believe everything is fine. Callous didn't say it, but her threat floated clearly in the air. D'Angelo sank helplessly into the sofa. That bag cost tens of thousands of dollars. Even in normal circumstances, it was money he would have to specifically ask Kenyatta for. Now, with cobwebs in his account, Callous's demand felt like a death sentence. He was trapped. On one side was his wife, who had become a cold monster controlling his life. On the other, his mistress, who started showing her claws as soon as the money ran out. The foolish prince realized his perfect world was crumbling. A week of deprivation was enough to push Mrs. Eudora and D'Angelo to their mental limit. They couldn't take it anymore. That night, they deliberately waited for Kenyatta to return and intercepted her directly in the living room. The lights were on brightly, creating an interrogation atmosphere. "We need to talk, Kenyatta," said D'Angelo, trying to sound authoritative, though his face showed exhaustion and frustration. Kenyatta set down her brief Angelo, trying to sound authoritative, though his face showed exhaustion and frustration. Kenyatta set down her briefcase and looked at them both calmly. "Speak. What is it you want exactly?" "Stop acting dumb," snapped Mrs. Eudora, unable to contain herself. "You are torturing us slowly, cutting off all comforts, humiliating us, making us live like beggars. After all the kindness we have shown you, this is how you repay us?" "Kindness?" Kenyatta almost laughed. "What kindness are you talking about? The daily insults or blessing your son's affair?" "Kenyatta, this is too much," continued D'Angelo. "You are my wife. Your duty is to serve your husband and your family, not to act on your own like this. If you can't be a good wife, then maybe we what, D'Angelo?" Kenyatta cut in. Her voice was sharp. "We divorce? Is that what you want?" The direct question left D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora in shock. They only wanted to threaten her. They weren't really prepared for such a drastic consequence. They knew that without Kenyatta, they were nothing. "D'Angelo, she has no respect anymore. She is trying to destroy your home," shouted Mrs. Eudora, trying to manipulate the situation. "You are ungrateful, Kenyatta. We welcomed you into this prestigious family. You, coming from a regular family, we gave you a life of luxury, and you have become a troublemaker. Enough is enough." Kenyatta was done with their false narratives. She said nothing. With a very calm movement, she opened her briefcase, took out a brown envelope, and placed it on the coffee table between them. Took out a brown envelope, and placed it on the coffee table between them. "What is this?" asked D'Angelo suspiciously. "Open it," replied Kenyatta. With trembling hands, D'Angelo opened the envelope and pulled out its contents. A glossy, A4-sized photograph. Mrs. Eudora also leaned in to see. In an instant, all the anger and arrogance disappeared from their faces, replaced by a ghastly pallor. The photo clearly showed the scene at the boutique cafe. D'Angelo looking with love at Callis leaning flirtatiously, and Mrs. Eudora smiling happily while tenderly arranging Callis' hair, the irrefutable proof of a triple betrayal. A suffocating silence filled the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock sounded like a hammer. Kenyatta finally spoke. Her voice was low, but it trembled, not from crying, but from anger held back for a long time. Thank you. Why exactly, Mama? Her eyes locked directly onto Mrs. Eudora. For the kindness on your part of blessing my husband's affair with my money? Or for the life of luxury you enjoyed with my husband's concubine while I work my fingers to the bone to pay for it all? Then she turned to D'Angelo. And you, D'Angelo, spoke of a wife's duty. Is it a husband's duty to betray, lie, and live like a parasite off his wife? There was no answer. Both were frozen, naked before the truth, caught in the act. The photograph on the table became a silent judge handing down their sentence. The real storm had just begun, and they realized they no longer had anywhere to hide. The silence that followed Kenyatta's words felt heavier than any storm. The photograph on the table became the center of gravity in the room, drawing all gazes and sucking up all the oxygen. D'Angelo looked at the photo, then at Kenyatta and back at the photo. His face was a canvas of confusion and evident guilt. He had no excuse. But Mrs. Eudora, who had lived for decades behind a mask of arrogance, would not give up so easily. For her, admitting a mistake was the greatest form of weakness. Her pale face began to redden again, not from shame, but from an anger seeking an outlet. It's a setup, she hissed, pointing at the photo with It's a manipulated photo, surely. You are doing this on purpose to get rid of us and keep all my son's fortune. Kenyatta looked at her without blinking. Your son's fortune, Mama? What fortune is all this talking about? Mrs. Eudora gestured with her hand encompassing the magnificent room. Everything in this house belongs to D'Angelo. You only live here on borrowed time. You should be grateful we let you live here. And now you dare to stage this cheap drama. You only live here on borrowed time. You should be grateful we let you live here, and now you dare to stage this cheap drama. That threat was her last and fatal mistake. It was the final weapon she had always used to intimidate Kenyatta. But tonight, the weapon turned against her. Is that so? Said Kenyatta calmly, as if dealing with a difficult client. If you insist that I only live on borrowed time and that this house is your son's property, then there is nothing more to talk about. Mrs. Eudora felt she had won. I'm glad you know your place. Now pack your bags and get out of my son's house. Ow. D'Angelo seemed surprised by the escalation of the situation. Mama. He tried to intervene, but his mother's withering glare silenced him. Kenyatta didn't move an inch. She merely looked at her mother-in-law with an undecipherable expression, a mixture of pity and disgust. I will leave with pleasure, said Mrs. Eudora. She smiled triumphantly, but the ones who will have to pack bags will be you too. She leaned down, opened the briefcase she had left on the floor, and took out a thick blue plastic folder. She opened it and spread its contents on the table, right next to the photo of the betrayal. There, spread out, were several official documents with the land registry letterhead, stamps, and signatures. The most prominent was the one on top, the property deed for the land, and the building they were in at that very moment. Read it, said Kenyatta. Read the name of the sole owner listed there. Hesitating, D'Angelo picked up the document. His eyes widened as he read the name printed in bold in the owner section. It wasn't his name, nor his father's, nor a joint ownership. There was only one name, Kenyatta Dubois. Below was the transaction date, 2 years before she and D'Angelo got married. The house had been bought with cash. The document fell from D'Angelo's limp hands. Mrs. Eudora snatched it and read it with panic. She read it once, twice, 3 times. The truth hit her so hard, she staggered back and collapsed onto the sofa. Her face, previously red with anger, was now pale as a corpse's. The entire narrative of her life crumbled in an instant. She wasn't the grand dame of her son's house. She was simply a tenant, a parasite, living off the generosity of the daughter-in-law she had despised so much. This house is mine, repeated Kenyatta, her voice echoing clear and authoritative in the stifling silence. The cars in the garage are company assets. This furniture, I paid for it. Even that plate you used for dinner last night. Mama, it's my money. She paused, letting the cruel truth soak into their bones. So, Mama, I repeat the question. If anyone has to leave here, who would it be? 2 days passed in an atmosphere of suffocating Cold War. Mrs. Eudora locked herself in her room, too ashamed to show her face. D'Angelo wandered the house like a caged lion, confused, furious, and desperate. All his attempts to contact Kenyatta by phone failed. His wife seemed to have disappeared from the house, but her presence was felt in every corner through the cut utilities and the torturous silence. On the third day, a message arrived on D'Angelo's phone from Canada. It was short and emotionless. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at this address. To end everything, come alone. Below the message was an address in the heart of Atlanta's financial district. An imposing skyscraper D'Angelo had often passed but never entered. A spark of hope sprouted in his mind. Maybe Kenyatta wanted to negotiate. Maybe he could still get his share, or at least access to an emergency fund. With that thought, he decided to go. The next morning, with the last money remaining in his wallet, he took a taxi to the address. When he arrived in front of the building named Apex Tower, he stood amazed. It wasn't a small office. It was the headquarters of a major corporation. Hesitating, he entered the incredibly grandiose lobby. The floor was black granite, polished like a mirror. Seeing him approach, the receptionist stood up immediately and smiled kindly. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" "I have an appointment with Mrs. Kenyatta Dubois," replied D'Angelo, a bit nervous. The receptionist smiled even more. Mr. Vance, of course, the chairwoman is waiting for you. I will escort you." Chairwoman, CEO. D'Angelo's heart beat wildly. He followed the receptionist to a private VIP elevator to the top floor, the 50th. When the elevator doors opened, a young woman with a professional look greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Vance. I am Ms. Price, Chairwoman Dubois' personal assistant. This way, please. The chairwoman awaits you in her office." D'Angelo walked down a silent hallway with thick carpet. Every employee he cross-stopped and nodded respectfully. "Good morning." Everyone seemed to know him. Ms. Price opened a huge solid wood door at the end of the hall. Behind it opened an office larger than the entire ground floor of his house. The walls were glass, offering a 360-degree view of Atlanta. In the middle of the room, behind a huge mahogany desk, sat a woman. It was Kenyatta, and at the same time it wasn't. She wore a perfectly tailored navy blue power. Her hair was pulled back impeccably, and her aura radiated absolute power and confidence. This was not the Kenyatta who cooked oxtails in the kitchen. It was not the Kenyatta who bowed her head when insulted. This was a queen on her throne. "Welcome to Apex Innovations, D'Angelo," greeted Kenyatta. Her voice was calm, but it resonated in the room. "Oh, to be more precise, welcome to my world." D'Angelo could only stand there open-mouthed, his jaw slightly slack. The nameplate on the desk confirmed everything. Kenyatta Dubois, Chairwoman and CEO. This company is yours," he stammered. "Yes, it is mine. I founded it 8 years ago, starting in a small garage," replied Kenyatta, as if talking about the weather. She pressed the intercom button. "Price, please bring the financial report for Mr. Vance." A moment later, Ms. Price entered and placed a folder in front of D'Angelo. "Open it," ordered Kenyatta. With trembling hands, D'Angelo opened it. Inside were the details of every investment he had received monthly. They weren't investment returns, but a company expense item coded as allowance for executive family members. The next page contained a breakdown of all credit card expenses for him and his mother, all paid in full by Apex Innovations. "Everything you have had, everything you have enjoyed, everything you have used to maintain your mistress," continued Kenyatta. Her voice, devoid of emotion, cut deep. "It was an allowance from me, a benefit I offered you due to your status as my husband." She looked him directly in the eyes, now filled with terror, like an underperforming employee. "That benefit is now officially revoked." D'Angelo collapsed into the chair opposite. His invisible crown had turned to dust. The foolish prince finally realized he was nothing, just a name on an allowance list that had now been deleted. D'Angelo's defeat in the Apex Tower was psychological, but Kenyatta knew that for people like D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora, the biggest blow was the physical and public loss of their status symbols. 2 days after that meeting, the red European sports car D'Angelo often used to show off was parked in front of the house. D'Angelo was preparing to go out and do something very humiliating: borrow money from friends. Just as he opened the door, 2 large tow trucks pulled up right in front, blocking the exit. Several burly men in uniforms reading Apex Logistics stepped down. "Good morning. We are from the Asset Management Department of Apex Innovations," said the team lead. Polite but firm, he showed an order. "We have come to repossess the 2 vehicles with the license plate numbers indicated in this document, which are company property." One was D'Angelo's sports car, the other the luxury SUV Mrs. Eudora used for her social meetings. "What are you doing?" "This is my car," protested D'Angelo. "According to our data, this vehicle is registered as a company car for executive use in the name of Apex Innovations." "It is not personal property, sir," replied the employee calmly, signaling his team to start the operation. Inside the house, Mrs. Eudora heard the commotion and came out immediately. Her eyes widened as she saw her prized car being prepped for towing. "Hey, what are you doing to my car? Don't you know who I am, huh?" she screamed hysterically. The neighbors began to come out of their houses to watch the drama unfolding in front of the magnificent mansion. The spectacle was a nightmare for Mrs. Eudora, who had always guarded her image as a high society lady. "We are just following the legitimate owner's instructions, ma'am," replied the employee, impassive to Mrs. Eudora's fury. D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora could do nothing. They could only watch stunned as the 2 luxury cars, which were their symbols of pride, were loaded up and taken away. Now they were stranded in their palace without their golden carriages. The humiliation in front of the dozens of gossiping eyes of the neighbors was more painful than the loss of the money itself. Kenyatta had not only taken their luxury, but also their pride and the social mask they had worn for so long. For D'Angelo, losing the car was a huge blow, but the deadliest strike came from an unexpected place, Calais. Calais. Calais' birthday was in 2 days, and D'Angelo found himself in the worst situation of his life. No money, no car, no power. Desperate, he sold the only luxury watch he still had, a gift Kenyatta had given him on an old anniversary. With that money, he bought a handbag from a decent national brand, but far from the Maison Élysée standard Calais demanded. He showed up at Calais' apartment with a gift box and a bouquet of flowers. Calais' face, initially smiling, soured as soon as she saw the contents of the box. "What is this?" she asked with a cold tone. It's a gift for you." "Happy birthday, baby," replied D'Angelo nervously. Calais scoffed. "A gift? You call this a gift? My grocery bag is more expensive than this." "Calais, please understand. I'm going through a rough patch. I don't care about your problems." Calais cut him off. Her anger exploded. She threw the handbag box at D'Angelo. "I'm sick of your excuses. You're a loser, a foolish prince with nothing. Did you think I was going to stay with you now that you've become a beggar? You're nothing but a parasite living off his wife, D'Angelo, and now that your wife has cut you off, you are nothing." Every word from Calais was a dagger stabbing directly into the heart of D'Angelo's already shattered ego. "I've already found a replacement," continued Calais with a cruel smile. "A real man, not a mama's boy like you." Just at that moment, the horn of a luxury car sounded from below. Calais picked up her bag, an authentic Maison Élysée bag. "Where did you get that bag?" asked D'Angelo with a hoarse voice. "From Mr. Evans. He's taking me to Paris next week to celebrate my birthday," replied Calais indifferently. She walked past D'Angelo, deliberately bumping his shoulder, and opened the door. "Oh, and one more thing. The rent on this apartment is due tomorrow. Congratulations on being homeless." Calais slammed the door in D'Angelo's face. Through the window, D'Angelo saw Calais go down and get into a Bentley driven by an older, wealthy man. They drove off laughing, leaving D'Angelo alone in the silent hallway of the apartment, shattered and completely alone for the first time in his life. After being abandoned by Callus, D'Angelo stumbled back home. He found his mother sitting in the dark living room. The electricity had been cut, they hadn't paid the bill, or rather, they couldn't pay it. Only an emergency light shone faintly, revealing the dust starting to accumulate on the expensive furniture. They sat in miserable silence, two nobles expelled from their throne. Suddenly, the front door opened. Kenyatta entered. Her silhouette was outlined sharply against the light from outside. She didn't light a candle or lamp. She simply stood in the doorway, looking at the two figures huddled in the darkness. Said Kenyatta. Her voice was cold and formal. D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora raised their heads. You have two options, continued Kenyatta. First, you can leave here this very night. You can take your clothes, but leave everything else. I won't press charges against you for anything, and you will be free to go wherever you want. Leave without money, without a destination, without a place to live. That option was equivalent to being on the street. The second option, Kenyatta extended her hand. In her palm was a simple key. I have rented a small apartment for you. 3 months' rent is already paid. Inside, there is basic furniture and some cash on the table, so you can eat for a week. After that, you will have to find a way to survive on your own. Mrs. Eudora looked at the key with horrified eyes. A small rental apartment after decades of luxurious living? It was an unimaginable humiliation. But D'Angelo saw it from another perspective. After being humiliated by Callus and left penniless, Kenyatta's offer felt like a life preserver in the middle of the ocean. It was a humiliation, yes, but it was also a chance to survive. With a heavy hand passing his mother, who was still paralyzed by shock, D'Angelo walked toward Kenyatta. He didn't dare look his wife in the eyes. He simply bowed his head and took the small key from Kenyatta's palm. It felt heavier than a gold bar. It was the key to his new and miserable life and the symbol of his absolute surrender. That night, with only 2 suitcases of clothes, D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora left their palace in a taxi. They arrived at a narrow street on the outskirts of the city, in a rougher neighborhood. The rental apartment was exactly as they had imagined, small, with peeling paint on the walls and a single bulb shining faintly in the entrance. When D'Angelo opened the door, a smell of dampness and staleness greeted them. This was their bitter reality. From the golden throne, they had fallen into the deepest abyss. Life in the cramped rental apartment was hell on earth for Mrs. Eudora. Her pride was eroded every day by the heat radiating from the thin roof, the noise of the neighbors through the paper-thin walls, and the bitter reality of having to think twice, even to eat. The money Kenyatta had left them ran out in the blink of an eye. Now they lived on D'Angelo's small and irregular wages. Arrogance was no longer a luxury she could afford. The final blow to her pride came when, desperate, she tried to contact one of her high society friends who had always flattered her. With the last balance on her phone, she called and, with a pleading voice, tried to borrow money. The answer was icy and humiliating. Eudora, I'm sorry. My husband says we shouldn't associate with people of bad repute. Besides, we're going on vacation to the Hamptons and need a lot of money. The call cut off. In that moment, Mrs. Eudora collapsed. She realized that the social status she had revered so much was as thin as paper. Without the money and luxury backing her, she was nothing in their eyes, just a shameful piece of gossip. Gathering the strength and pride she had left, she did something she had never imagined in her life. She took a hot, crowded city bus and went to Apex Tower. She looked so small and lost in the grandiose lobby. Her clothes, once expensive, now looked cheap and worn. Kenyatta's assistant, Miss Price, saw her in the lobby with a look of compassion. She escorted her not to the CEO's office, but to a small, modest meeting room. A few minutes later, Kenyatta entered. She wasn't wearing a power suit, but a blouse and simple slacks. Her face was serene. There was no expression of triumph. Mrs. Eudora couldn't take it anymore. She knelt on the floor and broke down crying. Her sobs were no longer the manipulative tears of a drama queen. They were the heartbroken sobs of an old woman who had lost everything. "I'm sorry, Kenyatta."
I'm sorry.
She sobbed through tears. "I was wrong. I was arrogant. I was cruel to you. I was jealous of you. I was jealous seeing how amazing you were. While my son can't do anything, so I blamed you for everything." She confessed it all. Her envy of Kenyatta's success, which she secretly knew about, her arrogance used to hide the shame that her son was a kept man, and even her fatal mistake of supporting D'Angelo's affair to have a daughter-in-law she could control. "Please, I beg you, Kenyatta, I'm not asking you to give back the luxury. I just can't live like this. Punish me, but please don't be so hard on D'Angelo. Everything he did is because of my bad parenting." Kenyatta listened to the entire confession in silence. She didn't help her up. She let her mother-in-law pour out all the poison of regret from her heart. When the sobs subsided, Kenyatta finally spoke. Her voice was soft but firm. "Get up, Mama. Being on the floor changes nothing. Regret means nothing without change. This punishment is not to torture, but to teach. What lesson have you learned now?" Mrs. Eudora looked at her with wet eyes. For the first time, she saw Kenyatta not as a daughter-in-law or a money-making machine, but as a woman much wiser and stronger than herself. A money-making machine, but as a woman much wiser and stronger than herself. While his mother swallowed the bitter pill of regret, D'Angelo swallowed dust and sweat in the warehouse of a large logistics company on the outskirts of Atlanta. After being rejected at dozens of offices for having no work experience, the only job he could get was as a warehouse associate. The first day was hell. His body, used to the softness of the sofa and the cool air conditioning, had to lift heavy boxes in the humid warehouse heat. His muscles screamed in pain. His soft palms scraped and blistered within the first hour. His foreman was a rough man who shouted profanities if he worked too slowly. He ate lunch with the other workers, sitting on cardboard eating from a container with modest sides. He heard them complain about car notes and their kids' tuition, real problems that sounded so foreign to his ears. Here, nobody cared about his last name or what car he drove before. Here, his worth was measured solely by how many boxes he could move. Every night, he returned to the rental apartment with his body broken. He fell asleep as soon as he arrived, with no time to think too much. Slowly but surely, the hard work began to change him. His arrogance and laziness were eroded by extreme exhaustion. The first weekend, he received his paycheck, a direct deposit that amounted to just a few $100s. The amount wasn't even enough to pay for a round of drinks at the club he used to go to with Callis. But as he looked at that money, a strange sensation arose in his heart, a feeling he had never experienced before. It was pride. This money was his. It wasn't a gift, nor an allowance, nor the result of living on borrowed time. It was the result of his own sweat. That night, for the first time, he gave his entire paycheck to his mother. "Mama, here is the money for the week's groceries," he said briefly, and went to his room to lay down his aching body. Mrs. Eudora looked at the money in her hands and then at her son's back, now firmer and sturdier. Tears welled up in her eyelids again. Her son, her foolish prince, was finally starting to learn to be a man. A month after the tearful meeting with Mrs. Eudora, Kenyatta decided it was time to close the final chapter of her past. She didn't meet D'Angelo in an office or at his home. She went to the small diner/waffle house where the warehouse workers had lunch. D'Angelo was sitting alone in a corner, eating ravenously. His appearance had changed a lot. His skin was darker from the sun, his body more muscular, and his gaze was no longer empty, but filled with the focus of a worker. He wasn't surprised to see Kenyatta arrive and sit across from him. Kenyatta stood in contrast to the environment, wearing casual but elegant clothes. But there was no longer a cold, intimidating aura. Her face looked calmer, more at peace. "How are you, D'Angelo?" greeted Kenyatta. Her voice was sincere. "Fine, I'm fine," replied D'Angelo briefly and awkwardly. "What are you doing here?" Kenyatta went straight to the point. She placed a thick folder on the table between their plates. "It's the papers, D'Angelo. Read them, and if you agree, sign them." D'Angelo already knew what it was. The divorce papers. He opened them and read them quickly. Kenyatta demanded nothing. The division of assets only stipulated that all assets in Kenyatta's name would remain her property, and D'Angelo would not receive a dime, a fact he had already accepted. There were no onerous or humiliating clauses. Everything was clean and professional. "I'm not going to make things difficult," said D'Angelo with a hoarse voice, without looking up from the papers. "I'll sign." "Thank you," replied Kenyatta. There was a moment of silence. The bustle of the diner filled the void between them. "Kenyatta," called D'Angelo, finally daring to look into the eyes of the woman who was once his wife. "I'm sorry for everything. I know it's too late, and I don't expect your forgiveness. I just want you to know, I truly regret it." Kenyatta looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she saw the real D'Angelo. Not the foolish prince, not the traitorous husband, but simply a man who had made many mistakes and was now facing the consequences. "I have forgiven you, D'Angelo," said Kenyatta softly, "and I have also forgiven myself for abandoning myself for so long. Now we can both start a new life." D'Angelo signed the papers with a pen Kenyatta lent him. When he handed the folder back, he felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. It was a sad ending, but also a relief. Their marriage, full of hypocrisy, officially ended in a modest diner, over a table where a plate of food and drops of sweat from work rested. Months passed, and the lives of D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora found a new, arduous rhythm. After the 3-month contract Kenyatta had funded ended, they had to pay the rent themselves. They had to move to an even smaller rental apartment further from the city center. Mrs. Eudora, without any professional skills, began accepting orders for homemade pound cakes and sweet potato pies from her neighbors. Her baking skill, which previously only served to show off at her social gatherings, was now her only way to survive. Every morning, she learned to haggle vegetable prices at the farmer's market and calculate every penny meticulously. She didn't complain anymore. Her aged face was marked by fatigue, but also by a new strength. D'Angelo kept working at the warehouse. The pay was low, but he was a diligent worker. He no longer dreamed of sports cars or luxury watches. His dreams were now much more modest. Pay the rent on time and ensure his mother had money to buy ingredients for her cakes. The mother and son relationship changed completely. Before, they were partners in laziness and arrogance. Now they were a team fighting to survive. Sometimes, when D'Angelo returned from work and found his mother asleep from exhaustion in front of the oven, he would cover her with a blanket, a small gesture of care that would never have occurred to him before. They had lost everything: fortune, status, friends, and family. It was a very expensive life lesson. They weren't happy, but they were no longer living a lie. In poverty and hard work, they were slowly recovering the fragments of dignity they had lost. Kenyatta didn't give them a fish, nor did she give them a fishing rod. She simply threw them into the sea and forced them to learn to swim. And, surprisingly, they made it. A year later, Kenyatta was standing in front of the huge window of her new office in Singapore. Apex Innovations had achieved a massive expansion in the Southeast Asian market. The contract she had just signed was worth billions of dollars. She sketched a slight smile, not a cold and calculating smile like before, but a smile tinged with genuine satisfaction and peace. After the divorce, she occasionally heard about D'Angelo and Mrs. Eudora through Ms. Price, who monitored them from a distance according to her instructions. Knowing they could survive on their own, Kenyatta was finally able to let go of the past completely. She no longer lived under the shadow of revenge. Her energy was now dedicated entirely to building her kingdom and, more importantly, building her own happiness. She started dedicating more time to herself. She learned to paint, traveled alone, made new sincere friends. Her phone rang. It was a video call from her friend, Nia. "Congratulations, Madam Chairwoman. Incredible. I saw the news of the contract on TV," exclaimed Nia from the other side of the screen. Kenyatta laughed. "Thank you, Nia," from the other side of the screen. Kenyatta laughed. Thank you, Nia. It's all thanks to your support. So, when are you coming back? We have to celebrate soon, Nia replied. Soon, answered Kenyatta, her eyes contemplating the bright skyline of the city below her. After the call, Kenyatta remained there looking at the endless city lights. Before, she felt her fortune was a gilded cage she had built to lock herself in a charade. She had voluntarily become a small, invisible bird to protect someone else's ego. The door was always open. She was just too afraid to fly. That betrayal, that pain, was the storm that broke her cage. And her revenge was the way she learned to use her wings. Now she no longer needed a cage. She no longer needed to dim her light for anyone. She was Kenyatta Dubois, not someone's wife, nor someone's daughter-in-law. She was the queen of her own destiny. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with